Grab the keys to your city's granaries, Wargamers, because today we are gaming out the first siege in the First Elopation War, a solo wargaming exercise inspired by William Sylvester's excellent solo wargaming guide. In our last episode, we dealt with the aftermath of the first battle, the Battle of Silcock Farm, in which a badly outnumbered Sinistrean force tried to delay a much larger invasion force from the nation of Dextromania. They didn't do so hot. They lost 300 casualties and retreated in some disorder and were able to get in through the gates of the city of Leftopolis with pursuit hot on their heels. The invading army, that would be Army Group 2 for the Dextromanians, have been able to invest the city, and we track time very closely here, very Gygaxian. They begin the siege on the 20th. To give you an idea of the overall strategic situation, the Sinistreans have an army group headed for the capital of Dextromania. They are, assuming good weather, we can even figure out how far away they are. When the siege begins, they are 5 inches, which is 100 miles, 5 inches, 100 miles. That's 10 days away. We're going to make them rest one day out of every week. So call it 2 weeks away from Forthright City. That's really going to be the key here. The minute that they cross the frontier, messengers are going to go out, and they're going to have to work their way back over here to determine how the Dextromanians respond to this counter-invasion along the southern border. Kind of an interesting strategic situation going on here. The big question for today is, can the defenders of Leftopolis, which includes the survivors of the Battle of Silcock Farm, can they hold out long enough for this threat to become apparent, news to reach the north, and maybe the secondary force that is following up to assist Army Group 1? I mean, let's take a look. All of the Dextromanian forces, all of these guys are headed, and the Army Group 2 is likely to arrive on, let's see, so they're in Timberbrook on the 23rd. So we're anticipating arrival of the Sinistreans at Forthright City on 11/7. On the other side, you've got unimproved roads here. Again, assuming clear weather, we're going to have to go through that process. It's about 3 inches apart. That's only 60 miles. So you're looking at about 6 days. They're going to arrive in Leftopolis on the, 6 days on the, on All Hallows Eve. If we assume 1 day for rest, they're going to be able to start participating on Halloween, which is the very day, so the day that both forces arrive here. So at that point, we'll have to figure out what the response is. Do they continue up to try to besiege Middleborough, or do they try to take the port city of Baybury? You know, maybe if the Dextromanians can conquer enough cities in their enemy's territory, this army might have to turn around. We'll have to wait and see. That's a question for another day. First, we need to play out the first couple of weeks of... Oh, I'm sorry. The reason I did this is because now I know I've got to figure out what happens in the first, call it, week of this siege. So let's take a look at the Solo Wargaming Guide. One of the things that you have to be aware of when you're dealing with the movement of large armies is supply. I'm largely hand-waving that away. Because we only have 2 forces that are operating on opposite sides of the frontier, I guess you could call it, I'm assuming that if you can draw an unbroken chain, that you've got supply wagons heading back and forth. It's not an issue. It will be an issue for the defenders of Leftopolis. It's going to be, the question now then is going to become, starting on the 23rd, do you have enough wagon trains? Can you feed enough resources into the siege to maintain it? And given that there's some fog of war effects, they need to be worried about this second army. They don't necessarily know where it is. So, you know, everything gets way too complicated for one man sitting alone to think of it all. So again, it's a game, right? See, it's gaming, right? Right there on the tin, Wargaming. We're just playing a game. We're kind of making it up as we go along, but we're trying to be as honest and open and as fair of a judge for these two forces as if our two best friends were handling them. I'll be honest with you. As an American, I have a soft spot for the underdog. I'm kind of hoping the Sinistreans can pull this out, but I'm trying not to let that factor into my judgment at all. So we're not worrying too much about supply loss. If you wanted to do something a little more complicated, I might have left a regiment here in East Sweetville and had them harass the supply lines or draw off some forces to alleviate the siege and allow more supplies to get into Leftopolis, but I didn't. So what are you going to do? This is where we're at right now. You gotta fight the battle as it arrives. So we're not too worried about supply loss, but we do need to worry about how these rules are used for solo games. And specifically, we're talking about the initial stages of a siege, and Bill says this set of rules is designed to take the initial stages out of the gamer's hands and toss them into the lap of fate. I love sitting in the lap of lovely fate. She has provided some of the best gaming moments ever. When the dice and the cards come up, quote, wrong, it forces you to get creative. True creativity is not being able to do whatever you want, whenever you want. It's being able to come up with answers when your back is against the wall, when you're given nonsense, to be able to find the patterns and build the narrative from that. And we're going to use a deck of cards for this situation. I've also taken a piece of paper out to take some notes. We want to set some initial stages, figure out what happens, and then try to piece together a cohesive narrative. To do that, we're going to use a regular deck of cards. Let me go ahead and shuffle these just a few more times so that you guys understand that I really am interested in letting fate decide the outcome of this, at least to the greatest extent possible. So there we have our randomized deck of cards. And essentially the rules that Bill has set up is... Okay, again, we're miniature war gamers. If you wanted to set up a table with terrain and set up, siege camps and engage in all kinds of shenanigans with the defenders launching forays on supply wagons and attempts to breach or undermine the walls, that's a perfectly serviceable way of doing it. Since I'm largely using this campaign as a means of generating tabletop battles, traditional line them up and throw forces at each other, we're going to work through the process as Bill recommends it. And he recommends you draw a food. Well, it's funny. He says to determine the food supply, the following three charts can be consulted at the beginning of a turn. And then it says draw a food and ammunition card on the fifth turn. Well, what is a turn? Then draw a food and ammunition card on the fifth turn, and then draw a health card on the eighth turn, and then draw a enlistment card on the 10th day. Wait, turn, day? We're just going to assume that those were each day. So I need to know what happens on the 25th, on the 28th, and on the 30th. Now, this kind of falls apart a little bit because the 30th, remember, is the day that Army Group 2 is going to arrive. So it kind of determines what the situation is like. But we're going to go through this anyway. The first 4 days, this is a large city. I don't know that it's got a complete Vauban-style fortress and defenses, but it's got city walls. And it's going to take a heck of a lot more than 6,000 men to crack this particular nut. So what we do is we just say, hey, look, for the siege, the first 5 days go largely without notice. On the fifth day, then, we have to figure out what the food and ammunition supply is like for both the attacker, who on a 5 has a 14-day ammunition supply. So we'll make a note here. The Dextrons have 14 days of food. I don't know if that means he has 14 additional days, or if it means on day 14 of the siege, meaning November 3rd, they run out of food. We'll figure that out in a minute. Better yet, we need to understand what the defender's supply is like. And the defender's supply with a 3, they have a 20-day food supply. Okay, well, the S is for the defenders. D is for the attackers. Wait. Well, that's Dextron and Sinistrean. Okay. They've got 20 days of food. So they can hold out for 20 days of food and ammo. So they can hold out until the 14th of November. And this is the usage. Whatever they're bringing in, they're not replacing as fast as they're using. So they are going to run out on November 8th. We may bump that up. So that's the initial week. The two sides are looking at each other. They're digging trenches. They're sapping and they're counter-sapping. And they're counter-sapping and going through all of that. On the 28th, it's been a full week. It's been 8 days of investment. Now we have to think about the health of, first, the attacker. And they've done a good job with their slit trenches. They have been able to avoid the effect of smallpox, cholera, etc., etc. The defenders, on the other hand, have come down with a bad case of smallpox. Boy, what a shame they don't have some kind of DNA scrambling vaccine, because they're going to suffer 5% casualties per day. So here on out, 5% casualties. Oh, I should put S equals 5% casualties per day. Well, how many effective men do they have? Remember, I said that once you reduce the effective force by 75%, so what that means is they're going to be unable to defend the walls. They won't have enough men standing on the walls after 5 days. That means on 11/2, they're going to run out. They're going to have to surrender the fort. So they start suffering, and 2 days later, they're down to 90% effectiveness. And on day 10, we have to figure out what the reinforcements are. And for the defender, we draw a card, and we get a Jack of Clubs. And in that case, no effect on siege. So the defenders were not able to rally any additional defenses. On a 7 through king, nothing happens. You can get everything from garrison surrenders at 50% casualties. Do they surrender after 25? Oh, so that's not the 11/3. They get no enlistment. So this doesn't have, lowest morale troops, garrison surrenders after 25%, all mercenaries, peasants, militia. We can also take a look at what happens to the attacker. And on a 10, no effect on siege. So essentially what would happen is if we had drawn 4 on the 28th, the attacking army would have stopped. They would have suffered 25% casualties, and the siege would have been broken. Unfortunately, for the Sinistreans, that did not happen. Instead, what happens is, on the 31st, on a Halloween day, well, on the 30th, rather, Army Group 2 arrives. And on the 30th, on the horizon, I guess you could say, and on the 30th, they become fully invested. So now you've got the entire weight of 2 army groups that are besieging Leftopolis. The Leftopolitan defenders cannot bring in additional supplies, and they're only able to maintain their defenses for an additional 2 days before they realize that they have to surrender Leftopolis. The question then becomes, what happens way down here? Where are we at on the 2nd? And did I say that was 6 inches? It's 2.5. No, I said it's 5 inches. Okay, good. So marching at 10 miles per day, I guess I should probably be rolling for these. They're going to be slowed down to half speed for 2 days. Weather effects, I guess. So that's for the siege. And then we'll make a note that on 10/24, we've got heavy rain. Oh, does that affect when they arrive? It's going to push their arrival back by a day too, isn't it? So they actually arrive possibly on the 31st. 3 is simply, oh, that's a light rain, okay, which does nothing for the first day, and then it clears up the next day. Oh, so that doesn't change anything. Okay, I spoke too soon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the 28th. So that's, so from here, that's going to be 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. So on the 28th, that is when Army Group South crosses the border. Couriers go out. Hey, we've got a problem. We've got an army that is only a... Wow, did I really mismeasure that? They're there on the 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, and then they are... Flip this around so we can check that out. That's going to be another 1, 2, 3, 4 days to get there. 1, 2, 3, and 4 days. So they got good weather all 4 days. So on the very day, so that's 28, 29, wait, 28, so 29, 30, 31. The very next day, 11/1, November 1st, is when the South Army arrives at Forthright City. How about that? Boy, the timing of all of this stuff is just so dramatic. What do you want? You want a Hollywood scriptwriter? Or you want a simple deck of cards? It's all it takes, man. The next question is a courier, largely unaffected by weather. I want to know, how long is it going to take word to reach the besieging forces? Traveling by improved roads, they've got to travel, that's going to be 2, 5.5, 6, 7, 8, 9 inches. So that's 9 days. And then we're going to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 additional 6. So it's going to be 15 days before the first courier. Even if we say, look, this is a courier, it's not an army, he can move twice as fast. Yeah, let's call it 8 days. It's going to be the 9th before word reaches these guys that Forthright City is now under siege. On the other hand, do you really think a full army... How big is that army anyway? I'm glad I take copious notes to help me remind me of these things. It's actually not a terribly large army. It's a unit of light foot, 3 regiments of foot, 1 light cavalry, and 1 artillery. It's enough to invest the city. It's got a garrison of like 400 men, 500 men to defend. Just enough to... So what are we looking at? 3,000. It's about 3,500 men. It's enough to threaten them, encircle them, and maybe not crack the walls, but at least lay siege to the capital of their enemy. And bear in mind, if you're moving 3,000 men around, it's going to be a little hard to hide that from people. So maybe Forthright City gets 3 days of warning, and they can send messengers out 3 days earlier. That still means that word is not going to reach Leftopolis and the 2 Dextromanian generals until, call it 11/6. Word reaches generals. Word reaches generals Von Skar and Kriegspiel. And then the question becomes, well, hang on a second here. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. It's November 2nd. And General von Kriegspiel says, look, we've captured the capital of this city, but I've got this whole army sitting here with nothing to do. Von Skar, what does he do? He's got 3 options. One is to say, look, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit here. The second thing is he can march on Baybury and try to capture that city. The third option is to march towards Middleborough. Now, the king is negotiating for peace, and the more that territory you can seize, the stronger the position for the diplomats. So I think, and what do we know about General von Kriegspiel? He has a CCR of, and I don't know what he should do, to be honest with you. He's got a CCR of 4. Fortunately, old Bill Sylvester has a suggestion for us. And that plan is a simple die roll. Develop 3 plans and roll a d6. And on a 1 or a 2, so what we're going to do is Von Skar and von Kriegspiel are going to get together, and I think von Skar, who is responsible for the siege, is going to hang out there with his forces and rest and recuperate and try to recover his casualties. The question is, what does von Kriegspiel do? And von Kriegspiel can either sit tight and wait for word from the king. He can march on Baybury or Middleborough. So it's going to be 1 or 2, sit tight, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's find out. So 3, 4, he decides he's going to march on Baybury with all of his forces. He can move 3/4 of an inch along improved roads. Wait a minute. Well, first of all, we should say he's going to wait for a couple of days. His boys have been marching a long time. So on 11/4, Army Group 2 sets out for Baybury. And I'm just so you know, I'm just scratching out some notes here. I'm going to sit down and put together a full campaign log once we go through all of this together, my friend. And so the question then is, what's the weather look like, and is he going to be at all delayed by it on his march towards Baybury? The problem we know, because of our omniscient view, is that the further he gets in, the less likely he's going to be to respond to this invasion of force down here. In November, a result of 2, 3, 4, and 9 through 12 is something. So we get a result of a 6, and we got good weather on the 4th, and the 5th, and on the 6th. Kind of a temperate climate here, huh? So the first 3 days, it's going to roll for the 7th as well. On the 6th, again, so for the first 4 days, and that's going to be 1, 2, 3. So on the 4th, Army Group 2 lays siege to Baybury, starting on 11/6. Begins and ends. When did this one end? This one ended on 11/2. And 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, it's actually on the 7th that he gets there. So now Baybury is under siege on the 7th, and much to his eventual chagrin, General von Kriegspiel is going to be left way out of position. He may be able to load up enough boats, if he can take the port here, to sail over to Oldmond. Nautical stuff, I haven't dealt with it all yet. I've been mainly concerned with the movement of armies. And because we're doing kind of a node-to-node thing, armies are mostly going to meet... it looks like we're going to have a lot more sieges than actual armies line them up and fight them. But that's okay, because now we know how sieges work. We can do the siege of Forthright City. But that siege is going to have to wait for another day. In the meantime, remember, gang, I'm praying for you.